So, this is honestly one of the most outrageous, outlandish and depressing stories I've reported on since joining the Lotus Eaters. However, not all stem cell research requires the practices which we will soon discuss, and there is some good news at the end. I'd also like to point out that while Ukraine is mentioned quite extensively here, this should not be taken as a reflection on the Ukrainian people, but merely emblematic of very shady business practices going on in the country, particularly in the mid-2000s.
I mean, Hunter Biden was all over the Ukraine stuff, wasn't he? He was put on the board of Burisma despite being a crack addict.
Yeah, and
getting lucrative money.
His father's been involved in the region for a long period of time. To say that there is corruption in the country is not new. Everyone knows this. It's a matter of record. But before we go on, what are stem cells briefly? So stem cells are a type of cell that can be grown into various different types of cell. As such, they are extremely promising for novel treatments of debilitating medical conditions, and they have been studied extensively over the past 20 years and more. I'm not going to say any more about that because without researching it intensively, I'm going to sound like a completely uninformed moron on the subject. Please take that as you will. So this is the start of the article. Now, this is from 2006. Ukraine babies in stem cell probe. Healthy newborn babies may have been killed in Ukraine to feed a flourishing international trade in stem cells, evidence obtained by the BBC suggests. Now, let that sink in.
That's horrifying, as in... Newborn babies as in born, taken away from their mothers and killed for stem cells.
That's what this article is claiming.
That is about as evil as it could possibly get, surely.
Yes, well, let's get into it. Disturbing video footage of post-mortem examinations on dismembered tiny bodies raises serious questions about what happened to them. Ukraine has become the self-styled stem cell capital of the world. This in 2006. There is a trade in stem cells from aborted fetuses amid unproven claims they can help fight many diseases. There has since been a lot more progress in that field. But now there are claims that stem cells are also being harvested from live babies. The BBC has spoken to mothers from the city of Kharkiv who say they gave birth to healthy babies only to have them taken by maternity staff. In 2003, the authorities agreed to exhume around 30 bodies of fetuses and full-term babies from a cemetery used by Maternity Hospital Number 6, which exists. You can see it on the map of Kharkiv. I would bring it up, but then if it gets hit by a missile, then people wouldn't be very happy with me. One campaigner was allowed into the autopsy to gather video evidence. She has given that footage to the BBC and Council of Europe. In its report, the Council describes a general culture of trafficking of children snatched at birth, and a wall of silence from hospital staff upwards over their fate. The pictures show organs, including brains, have been stripped and some bodies dismembered.
This is horrible.
Yeah. A senior British forensic pathologist says he is very concerned to see bodies in pieces, as that is not standard post-mortem practice. It could possibly be a result of harvesting stem cells from bone marrow. The hospital, of course, denies these allegations. And, so this is basically the substance of the story, though we will go deeper into it. And it's just one of the most outrageous things I think I've ever read. But
it sounds like it's come from like a depraved horror writer's mind or something like that. That in the future that they'll be harvesting babies for cells that potentially may prolong the life of the already living.
It's ghoulish, isn't it? It's really sick.
It's almost impossible to get my head around how people can live with themselves after doing this.
Yeah. And there's so many people involved as well. As we go to the next article, the babies who are murdered to order. The plastic bag looks as if it contains meat, but then a right leg is taken from it and placed surgically on the morgue table, followed by the left one. Then the torso. The head follows, a gaping cavity where the brain used to be. But it is only when the gloved hand of the pathologist examines the tiny fingers of a baby aged about 30 weeks that the full horror of what I am witnessing sinks in. This shocking scene was captured on video at post-mortem examinations carried out on behalf of Ukrainian mothers who claimed their babies were stolen from them at birth. The film was shown to me by an incredibly brave charity worker called Tatiana Zakharova, who represents up to 300 families who believe their healthy babies were deliberately targeted at a maternity hospital in Ukraine's most easterly city of Kharkiv. The babies, believes Tatiana, were taken at birth to have their organs and stem cells harvested as part of a sickening but highly lucrative international trade, and certainly the Ukraine has become the main supplier of the global stem cell trade. And this is from 2012, this article, the previous one from 2006. Tatiana discovered many more infants had died at the hospital in similarly odd circumstances, and then they go on to talk about the exhumations. And with the brains missing as well, apparently neurons in infants' brains are also a rich source of stem cells. It's very ghoulish. Another body shown is so badly dismembered it has to be put together piece by piece like a jigsaw. The post-mortem examination conclusions were profoundly disturbing, but Tatiana is now living in fear that the authorities are trying to silence her. Her 20-year-old son went missing in October in mysterious circumstances, and she fears he may have been killed in revenge for her campaign to uncover the truth.
I'm basically speechless. I feel sick from hearing this as well.
Yeah. It's horrendous.
I don't understand how anyone could tolerate this. And also the fact that it's not really widely known that this was going on here. I mean, you think that this would be scandalous news all around the world.
Yeah, and it gets worse because so these stem cells were being used in a clinic in Barbados, as far as we can establish, for beauty treatments based on stem cells. Pseudoscientific beauty treatments that did not work.
So they were murdering newborn babies to give essentially rich people these pseudoscientific beauty treatments.
Yeah. And if we get into that, so this is from 2007.
This is some of the worst humanity really has to offer.
I've been researching this all day, and it's been absolutely bleak. And one other thing, these cures don't work, they report here. At these institutes and clinics in Barbados, unqualified doctors practice untested treatments under unregulated conditions on uninformed patients. A perfect atmosphere for ruthless exploitation. In fact, the only requirement that is strictly observed by these centres is the preoperative palpitation of the prospective client's wallet. If it is thick enough, then they are qualified for treatment. These clinics require only 6 things in order to set up shop and rake in millions of dollars: a little space, a poor government hungry for cash, someone with MD after their name, a website, a source of fetal material, and desperate patients. Let's begin with Malibu psychiatrist William C. Rader's anti-aging Medra clinic in the Bahamas, which he co-founded with Yuli Baltaitis, who now runs the Institute for Regenerative Medicine there. Rader's previous specialty was eating disorders, but he raked in more than $30 million in just 3 years before being kicked off the island. Rader says that he has not published anything in the medical literature because it would leave him vulnerable to attacks from, quote, a conspiracy of scientists, government authorities, and pro-lifers, end quote.
What, having morality is a conspiracy, is it?
Yes. Medra's
I hope this
website.
person's in prison.
Medra's website claims to cure every known disease, including physical brain damage. And speaking of physical brain damage, we have an article on the site up here about Bill Gates and his various PR. But if we move up back to the issue, so we have this from the New York Times. Fetal tissue from abortions for research is traded in a grey zone. So essentially, while US law appears to prevent companies in the country from making profits on the trade of organs and body parts, there is basically no oversight of this trade, at least in 2015. It's a very simplified overview of it because it's quite an intricate issue. Quote, many researchers buy tissue from 2 small California companies. STEM Express, a 5-year-old business based in Placerville, California, this in 2015, describes itself as, quote, the largest provider of maternal blood and fetal tissue globally. It also says it offers, quote, special discounts to the academic community. Its founder has a bachelor's degree in sociology from California State University in Sacramento. She started the business with $9,000. An article last November in the Business Journal said that the company had grown more than 1,300% in 3 years. Its revenue was $2.2 million, according to a report in August 2014 in Inc. magazine. Ms. Dyer said that fetal tissue accounted for about 10% of the company's business. She agreed to be interviewed on the condition that she not be asked about the congressional investigation into her company's partnership with Planned Parenthood.
That's a funny caveat, isn't it?
Her lawyer and a crisis communication expert were present on the telephone interview. Nothing to hide here.
Crisis communication expert.
Yep. Yep.
If you wanted to incriminate yourself, that would be how you do it. And of course, Planned Parenthood is involved in this as well. I mean, I'm not surprised.
So what do Planned Parenthood do again?
I believe they are involved in, I think they particularly lobby the government and also carry out, I'm not sure if they're a charitable organisation or how it necessarily works, but they are heavily involved in abortions.
Right, yeah. These cells are hard to isolate, Miss Dyer said. These are hard processes, expensive processes that take millions of dollars of equipment. Just to attempt to do some of these isolations can cost us thousands of dollars, and it may not even work. The effort is reflected in the pricing. A vial containing 5 million frozen fetal liver CD133 plus stem cells can cost more than $24,000. And 5 million cells is pretty tiny as well. The final products are shipped fresh or frozen. Shipping fees are separate from specimen costs, and an overnight shipment to Germany, for example, can cost thousands of dollars, according to Miss Dyer. Fetal tissue sales are not limited to cells in a vial. More than a dozen research papers published since 2012 acknowledge in obtaining intact fetal eyes, hearts, livers, and kidneys from STEM Express. It's really... what can you say?
Morbid, and it's not even like it's going on in place. Well, you mentioned Ukraine and Barbados. This is the United States.
Yeah, California though. So.
Yeah, well,
but
hardly the United States.
I just want to underline this point. Fortunately, we don't actually need dead babies for stem cells, and I know I'm saying that loudly, but it's a really important point, and there is a good story here. If we go to this article about Yamanaka, so. This guy basically invented a type of stem cell that you can use without using embryos.
Good. Well,
it's an amazing development.
I think it's worth mentioning that stem cells could potentially cure lots of
Yes, I will
ailments.
mention that at the end.
Okay, I won't.
No, you're quite right.
Spoil your...
No, not at all. So we have here the story. Dr. Yamanaka was an assistant professor of pharmacology doing research involving embryonic stem cells when he made the social call to the clinic about 8 years ago. At the friend's invitation, he looked down the microscope at one of the human embryos stored at the clinic. The glimpse changed his scientific career. When I saw the embryo, I suddenly realized there was such a small difference between it and my daughters, said Dr. Yamanaka, 45, a father of 2 and now a professor at the Institute for Integrated Cell Material Sciences at Kyoto University. I thought, we can't keep destroying embryos for our research. There must be another way. After years of searching and at times almost giving up in despair, Dr. Yamanaka may have found that alternative. Last month, and again this is from a while ago, his was one of 2 groups of researchers that independently announced they had successfully turned adult skin cells into the equivalent of human embryonic stem cells without using an actual embryo.
Thank goodness for that.
I mean, to me, that just sounds like magic. It's like transmutation almost. And I have done a bit of cell biology. I'm not a complete noob. I have grown cancer cells and that sort of thing in the lab. But doing something like that is just miraculous. It's the sort of thing that where would you even start to explain to someone 100, 200 years ago? So well done, Dr. Yamanaka. This is what we want out of science, not the stuff we've been covering for the last 10 minutes.
Well, it sounds like to me that what we were talking about previously, that's just criminality, isn't it?
Yes.
It's just murdering babies for profit.
Yes.
And I think that everyone involved should be held accountable for it. I mean, these scientists that are actually solving it, I mean, fair enough. I mean, obviously they're exempt from that, but at least, you know, the stem cells can be used for good things, which I'm sure you'll get onto.
Yes. So the result of Yamanaka's research is iPSCs, induced pluripotent stem cells, which don't require the use of embryos. So you would think that's the job done, right? And there's no more harvesting dead babies. And yet, that is not the case, because first of all, you have to test the safety of the iPSCs, which means you need a good reference point, and so they are always compared to embryonic stem cells. And there are advantages. So embryonic stem cells, for some reason which no one quite knows, do not turn into cancerous tumours, whereas with iPSCs, there is a small chance that occasionally, depending on what you get and the conditions, they can turn tumorous, cancerous. So in this article from Nature, how human embryonic stem cells sparked a revolution, they talk about it. Now, they're obviously very pro this, but I'll just quote from the article here. Many predicted that iPS cells would soon displace embryonic stem cells in the research space, but it didn't happen. The number of ES cell publications grew rapidly after 2006 and has held pace at about 2,000 publications per year since 2012, writing in 2016. Part of the reason was that ES cells were the gold standard against which researchers could compare iPS cells, and even today there are some who doubt the safety of using iPS cells. Zhou Qi, a stem cell biologist at the Chinese Academy of Sciences Institute of Zoology in Beijing, says that concerns that iPS cells would cause tumours inspired him to use embryonic stem cells for more than a dozen clinical trials he is orchestrating. It's a lot of stem cells. Now, I just want to point out that 2,000 publications per year since 2006, that's a lot. Then consider the ones which didn't make it to publication or failed or whatever. But that doesn't equal 2,000 dead babies a year for science, and it's important to remember that. Most of the embryos are apparently taken from defective or surplus IVF embryos, in vitro fertilization, with the client's consent, allegedly. In addition, the harvest of embryonic stem cells from a single embryo can be grown and used for multiple studies. So the actual number is probably much, much lower, but still. And then just to end on something slightly less thoroughly depressing and morbid, let's talk about some of the health conditions that have been treated using stem cell therapies in research. So a big one is macular degeneration. So this is a cause of blindness, particularly among the elderly, and there are over 190 million people of working age affected with this. So it's a type of blindness that could just be cured with stem cell therapies. Then also type 1 diabetes, stem cells could be used to reduce or even end the reliance on insulin injections. There's amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS. They could replace the motor neurons which are disabled by the disease with neurons grown through stem cells. And then stuff like they've worked out how to understand some diseases and disabilities, such as the heritable Fragile X syndrome, or FXS, which is a type of intellectual disability. Mm-hmm. And also Parkinson's disease is another one which may be treated. And there's much more. Like, the literature on stem cells is immense. It's one of the most vibrant and well-funded fields out there. And hopefully that offers some hope for the future, as well as just morbid ethical barbarism.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast The Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as this premium video, The Politics of Taxi Driver, that Thomas and Josh did together. If you want to follow Thomas, you can also follow him on Getter at Thomas Dowling on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.